I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the NCAA. So the NCAA, if you're not familiar with them, you probably aren't from around here because they are the organization that runs college sports.
And the former governor is the president?
Charlie Baker, yes,
Yeah.
former governor of Massachusetts, is the president of the NCAA. Look, I was an NCAA athlete. To toot my own horn, I was a very bad kicker on a football team, and that was, my experience with the NCAA. In my own career, I didn't have anything good or bad to say about them because I was not going to make any money playing college sports. I was a bad kicker on a team that wasn't great either, and so I didn't have any NIL deals that were going to be coming down my door anyways. But the last couple of years with the NIL, name, image, and likeness rules that have been in place have kind of turned college sports into the Wild West in that you have, and I don't blame the players, by the way, for doing what they're doing. They're going out and saying, hey, how much can you give me for this year, especially if you're in a contact sport like football where your career could be cut short on any particular play. Yes, you should always be asking who's going to pay me the most in order to let me be there.
100%.
It's led to some unseemly things like who was it? I think it was the quarterback for UNLV last year that basically stopped playing for his team midseason and was rumored to be asking for all these new deals and stuff. But this is by virtue of the way the landscape is currently built today, where there aren't a ton of rules and kids are incented to grab as much as they can as quickly as they can because it could all be over tomorrow. So you have a settlement that was just approved by a federal judge between the NCAA and really it's tying together a few cases that were out there. It's called the House versus NCAA settlement. And it's not because this is, the House of Representatives or, Eddie House, who played for the Boston Celtics for a couple of years. Rather, House is a former Arizona State swimmer named Grant House, who brought a lawsuit in 2020 basically saying, hey, I can't earn NIL money. And the reason why House actually had a case on this was, look, people in the swimming community actually knew him. And there was another one a few years before this that it never went to trial, but there was a distance runner who was just fantastic, and a water bottle company wanted to pay him for, promoting their product, and he couldn't because of the NCAA, which, again, to me is just
Silliness.
silly. And I know that a lot of people listening probably have this dressed up idea of, these are kids who, should play for love of the game and this and that and everything. To which I say, okay, fine. Should the adults that are supervising them coach for the love of the game too? Because last time I checked, college football coaches get paid pretty well. Same with college basketball coaches. And even in today's world, college softball coaches. And so yeah, if we want to say it's love of the game, then let's make everyone play for the love of the game and not have a whole bunch of money flowing through institutions that helps to support them in many cases.
Likewise, again, was not a collegiate athlete, but how many hours of your week, Chuck, during season were dedicated to requirements that you train?
I can't remember what we were capped at. It was either 20 or 30 hours a week that we were capped at, but
Sure.
it was a heavy lift
Right.
that you had to do. It was like having a significant part-time job in addition to going to your classes and
Right.
stuff like that, and still finding time for a beer or two here and there. So I think ultimately, when you look at this, the thing that we first need to admit is that college sports are not for love of the game, and there's nothing amateur about them. The only thing that's been the only thing that's been even pretending to be amateurized there is the fact that the kids haven't been able to get paid because the NCAA has prohibited it, and the reason why dates back to the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, where the NCAA, in trying to get out from a bunch of workers' comp lawsuits that they were facing from college football players who were getting injured playing football, came up with the term student athlete to say, no, these are not employees of the school. They are student athletes, and so we don't have to pay workers' comp. That's literally where the NCAA came up with the term, and it came from, was trying to get out of paying kids money.
Further evidence that it's not amateur, what's the primary training source for Olympic athletes in this country?
The NCAA. Yeah. It's, again, to toot my own horn, not mine personally, but my school's, the Dartmouth College ski team basically is a good portion of the United States ski team in any particular Winter Olympics.
Sure.
And so when you look at what this means, this settlement effectively allows D1 universities to begin directly revenue sharing with their athletes as of July 1st, so 3 weeks from now.
What do you mean by revenue sharing? Is it just we can pay you a salary?
Yes.
Okay.
So previously, you had to come up with these, what they're called as NIL, name, image, and likeness collectives, which is basically the school soliciting money from wealthy alumni and everything, saying, hey, we'll pay you to represent, companies if we can. And then they go around and try to find actual NIL deals, which may or may not actually exist in a lot of cases. In this case, there is a revenue sharing cap where the Division I schools can spend up to $20.5 million in year one, and that number can increase based on how revenue may grow in the future. But that's how much they have to spend on their students. And that cap is in place to try to, cap out, to try to form, kind of a level playing field. But the NIL world is still going to exist on top of this, and so, who knows how level it's actually going to be. Actually, I'll tell you, it's not going to be particularly level.
Sure.
But here's the thing. This still doesn't actually fix the problem. And the problem, in my opinion, is one where there are a couple different ones, in my opinion. The first is there is no incentive for a student or coach to have any kind of long-term relationship with a school. And I think that's bad for the viewing experience in a few different ways. And believe me, I don't want kids to be like tethered to a school while their coaches just, globetrot around to wherever. But I want you to think about March Madness just as an example. Mike's not really a huge March Madness fan. He doesn't believe in basketball, but Tucker and I do, and that's great.
It's not true. I love the gambling part of March Madness. I just don't have any interest in watching any of the games.
It's fine. Which I just love. I love that whole sentence right there. But this March Madness, a couple things were true. Tucker, was this arguably one of the most boring March Madnesses as far as upsets?
Confirmed.
Yeah,
It was.
That's why Mike's bracket was right on top.
It was a chalk tournament.
As square as it gets.
If you were a high seed, you were basically moving on, aside from like a couple little upsets here and there. And part of the reason for that now is, unlike in prior years, where, hey, if you're like a great talent that happens to be at a small school, remember, the old transfer rules, you basically had to stay there. Otherwise, you had to sit out a year and miss time and yada, yada. You could build a program at a small school. In today's world, if someone is, a late bloomer who happens to have like a great freshman year, they either end up going to the NBA draft now, or they get scooped up by another program that can pay them more. So those small mid-major schools can't develop the continuity that let those, Gonzaga teams of the early 2000s go on runs, or,
I have a family member who does fundraising for a local university in the Boston market, and his argument is basically this, that, we will never be able to have a program like that because the second we find a good player,
they're going to go somewhere else.
They'll spend a year here, if that, and then go somewhere else.
Now, I'm not saying that you want to hold those kids down, because I'm a big believer of, no, like, everyone has to compete in order to get talent. But the way to do this, in my opinion, is by allowing schools to sign kids to multi-year contracts if they want to. So if you are a kid with an uncertain future who doesn't know how great you're going to be, and you get no one really giving you much, but hey, one school says, yeah, we'll give you $300,000 for the next, 3 years, but you got to stay for that time period. Great. That allows a school to build a program and develop it while still properly compensating that kid for where they were at that time. Remember, no like NBA player, NFL player signs a lifetime contract. They get a 3-year, a 4-year deal, and if they play well, great, you get a new, bigger one. So I think this is something that I think, really makes some sense to potentially do. I want to talk more about this because there's a lot of meat here.
Yeah, there's another question that I have, which I think is pretty important too, and maybe it's not an important, maybe once we explain it, it's not important, but I want to understand what this means for the 90+% of college and university attendees that are not athletes.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
The economics for the schools themselves and how all that works out, because that to me is a massive question here. If you're turning on this income stream for the student athletes, How did that previously subsidize non-student athletes, and what does that mean for the economics?